Today, I would like to welcome Jasper Jennings with his talk, First Impressions, Printed Images of Cricket in Georgian England. This is an underexplored area for us, although we did feature cricketing images in our opening exhibition at Palace House, Newmarket in 2016. Jasper has spent 20 years finding and selling antiquarian prints showing sporting activity. What can they tell us about how, why, and by whom cricket was played in the 18th and 19th and early 19th centuries? In his talk, it's illustrated by his own acquisitions, and Jasper will share his insights in what he sees. Jasper joined a shop selling rare prints and books in Covent Garden straight out of university. After a brief spell in New York, he started trading himself, exhibiting at international fairs as a member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association. He's a devoted follower of the English game, a member of the Cricket Memorabilia Society, and has written on printed collectables for titles such as Historic Houses, the Antiques Trade Gazette, and All Out Cricket. As Sally said, Jasper will answer questions at the end of the talk. All you have to do is type your question by pressing the Q&A button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So, Jasper, welcome, and thank you for giving this talk.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks also to Sally for allowing me to speak to the British Sporting Art Trust about this subject dear to my heart. This is one of a series of talks I give around handmade prints and the impact they had upon the society they served. And the more astute among you will have noticed the rather clever pun in the title of my talk, Early Impressions. Of course, impressions also refers to a printing from the press of an image. It should be noted, of course, in an age before photography, the one that we're dealing with, the only way most people assimilated visual information was from images printed in a press from metal, stone, or wood surfaces onto paper or fabrics or other materials. It should always be remembered that the vast majority of the population had no access to paintings or drawings or what you might call original art. This was just an age when the Society of Artists and the Royal Academy were just being formed, so there weren't regular shows of original art. As Tim said, the talk will be illustrated by some of my own acquisitions I found along the way, and also from images from major institutional holdings. I should add an extra thanks to Neil Robinson at Lord's for supplying 2 key images. The first of which is this painting by Francis Hayman, who was a founder member of the Royal Academy. It's an oil on canvas, traditionally, supposedly depicting cricket being played at Marylebone Fields, where Regent's Park now stands. So it introduces some of the traits of early cricket to us. The curved bat, you'll notice, in that eager pose of the batsman there, awaiting the underarm bowling. We've got a 2-stump wicket pitched upon rough ground. And we've got umpires carrying bats at both ends of the pitch, and 2 scorers in the foreground notching the runs with sticks in the low right foreground. So much of cricket iconography in the 18th century was actually based on this painting by Hayman, and another one also by Hayman, which we will meet in due course. It's not known who commissioned this particular painting or when it first arrived at Lord's. I should say it's hanging at Lord's now. And a print was engraved soon after this painting was completed by Grignon after Hayman's painting. And and it was also made into a print on linen, which is also in the Lord's Museum. So this is a ticket, a pictorial ticket for the Artillery Ground, which still stands, as we know, just north of the City of London, for a match between Kent and Slindon in June 1744. The pen inscription above the image is later. It's a dealer's resale price and caption, which in fact spectators were charged, we know, 6p, I believe, to watch games at the Artillery Ground at this time. You'll see that there are some similarities with the image we've just seen. It's loosely based, I think we can say, on that image by Hayman, incorporating some elements, including a seated scorer, which seems to have moved to the top right of the composition. But bowler and the batsman are in similar attitudes, as are some of the fielders. So the Artillery Ground was a key site for early cricket. It was owned by George Smith, who also owned an adjacent pub. He was a sort of early promoter of matches. Interestingly, he also advertised the engraving of the picture we saw on the first slide in 1748 in the General Advertiser as part of promotion for the game. So he was also selling the print for 5 shillings, I think it says, so quite not cheap. So it's a sort of souvenirs, kind of merchandise. He also sold that same print at other fixtures, by the way, around that time. And I should mention, after 1777, no more matches of importance were played at this ground, mostly due to complaints from neighbours who were complaining about excessive rowdiness and crowds and people sort of jumping over fences, probably using their plots to get the access to the ground illegally. And that was all part of probably a large betting fad for betting on these matches. It's all tied up with that, which we'll explore later. So yeah, you'll see copies of that Hayman image on punch bowls, snuff boxes, pin boxes as well. So it was heavily recycled, or derivations of that image were heavily recycled. This is the other great image after Hayman's painting of cricket in the 18th century. This is by Antoine Benoit, an engraving and etching. It's thought that Hayman may have been depicting himself batting here with the curved bat. He was a theatre scene painter at Drury Lane in his early career. And in fact, this is in that same tradition, really, of theatrical painting. So it's not to be taken sort of hugely seriously as a document of the game. It's probably anachronistic. This would have originally been painted on a board and hung up at one of the supper boxes at Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, just south of the River Thames. So that's where lots of people would have seen it. And I rather like the eight lines of verse below the image, beginning, Britons whom nature has for war designed, in the soft charms of ease no joy can find. Averse to waste, in rest inviting day, toil forms their game and labour is their play. So it's sort of already making claims to the manly virtues of the game, in contrast with the French, basically, in their fête champêtre and fête galante, the sort of imagery that was coming out of France at the time by Watteau. So they're lazing about picnicking while we're playing cricket. Warlike nation. So yes, there's probably anachronistic elements in here. And in fact, a smaller version of this engraving illustrated the first known code of laws, which was published in the New Universal Magazine in 1752, this time engraved by Cole, and it was captioned "Cricket in the Artillery Ground." It doesn't look much like the Artillery Ground, but looks pretty rural to me. But and even back then, I don't think London was quite that rural. So we can see that this print was one that was sold as part of a set by Sayer and Bennett, print dealers, in 1775. You can see here it's number 9 the game of cricket is played in the artillery ground. See, again, it's the connection with the artillery ground under a group of perspective views of Vauxhall, Ranelagh and Marylebone Gardens with rural diversions, etc. So that's, I just took that scan from a facsimile of their catalogue, which were prints for retail and wholesale and export. The catalogue's organised principally by size and price, so practicality, it's the four. This is a print study, not a print, but a print study. And in other words, this was turned into a print. It's by Robert Dighton, sort of draftsman, known for his more satirical works. It's one of a set of 6 games played in and around London, published by Bowles and Carver of St Paul's Churchyard. The series included Trap Ball, Four Corners in Chelsea, Four Corners of the former Skittles, Football in Barnet Marketplace, Fives at the tennis court in Leicester Fields, and Quoits played opposite the Horns, Kennington Common. So you can see the players already in light white clothing. They'd be wigged, the wigs would soon disappear when even when gentlemen were at play. We've still got underarm bowling. It wasn't round arm bowling, wasn't legalized. Round arm meaning raising the arm to shoulder height, but not above. That was legalized not until, I think, 1835, overarm much later in the 1860s. So even at the hands of this accomplished draftsman, you can see some of the limitations of depicting the dynamics of a team sport, where there's lots of moving parts, although some of those fielders, to be fair, in the background have been well captured in sort of their movement. The movement has been captured. We've got 3 stumps here, which is interesting. The third stump was provided for in the 1785 edition of the laws, reportedly because of an incident at the famous Hambledon Club, where the ball went clean through the 2 stumps without disturbing the bails. And that was felt to be unfair. LBW, by the way, came in 1774. This is a print from my former stock, which I sold. It's a 20th century impression, I believe, what we call a restrike of an earlier print. Maybe, I would guess, printed around the 20s, the 30s. It shows the same location, purportedly, which was the White Conduit Club, based in Islington, Pleasure Garden in Islington in North London. The members of the White Conduit Club in 1787 would go on to form the Marylebone Cricket Club, or at least most of the prominent members went in search of more space. So they went to Marylebone and formed the Marylebone Cricket Club. So this, again, very stylized, very prominent curved bats, 3 stumps, and some of you may think this could be a porcelain design. It does have that look. The artist could possibly be this O'Neill, Geoffrey Hammond O'Neill, the same artist who designed this engraving, also showing the White Conduit Club at Islington. It was published in 1787. You can see that it's very similar. This print illustrated the 1787 iteration of the laws in the New Universal magazine for July of that year. And O'Neill was a porcelain painter for the Chelsea and Worcester factories and the designer of pattern books. So yeah, just to go back to my print, it does have the look of a ceramic design. And that's just a close-up, just to show, which shows very clearly the early scorers notching up the runs. So literally making a note of runs on a stick by carving notches in it. So notches was the 18th century word for runs. This is another print of mine. It was a frontispiece to the June 1793 issue of the Sporting magazine. I bought this at auction some years ago. You can see there's tall hats much in use at this time. And this is the only authentic contemporary picture of cricket on Thomas Lord's first ground, which is the site of Dorset Square now, which is a bit further south of the current ground at St John's Wood. And you can see it contains the first explicit reference in the title to financial stakes. So there's a grand cricket match on the 20th June and following day between the Earls of Winchelsea and Darnley for 1,000 guineas. So that's John Bly, 4th Earl of Darnley, and George Finch, 9th Earl of Winchelsea, who were two important patrons, aristocratic patrons of the early game. And those are pretty high stakes. We've still got a 2-stump wicket, which is strange at this time because we're in the 1790s, but possibly that's an error. I don't know. And we've got the famous scorer, Samuel Britcher, pictured on the bench in the foreground. There was usually a scorer provided, one from each team, so they could sort of confer after the match. But one of those will be Britcher, those two gentlemen sitting with their backs to us. And he compiled a famous series of scorebooks published in the very early 19th century. So, betting. This is an image that some of you will recognise from Nicholas Price's excellent recent essay for BSAT, or BSAT, I should say, on Rowlandson. It was the Rye commentator on the social mores of Regency society. I think it, I don't know of any contemporary image of betting at a cricket match. This is obviously at a race meeting, but I think it captures some of the frenetic activity around the side betting that was going on at the fringes of cricket grounds at the time. There were licensed bookies at Lord's and other grounds, very similar to race meetings, and perhaps there wouldn't be so many spectators arrive on horseback, but they would be betting during the matches as the matches swung one way and then looked like they were swinging to the other side. And it just really illustrates that betting was the prime motivation for the game, really. It was behind matchmaking, it was behind promotion, it was behind the reporting of the game. Match scores were often secondary in the reporting of the time, and matches were made with the intention of producing the most attractive bets, really. And teams were put together, men given to one side or the other to sort of even up the odds, as it were. And it was central. It was certainly central to the playing of the game in this period. Where there's not much evidence, contemporary evidence, documentary evidence about this side of the game, maybe perhaps understandably. So a lot of it's reading between the lines. Although in 1817, William Beldam, one of the great batsmen of the day, was banned at Lord's from playing at Lord's for cheating. He apparently sold a match between England and Nottingham. A team called England and a team called Nottingham. By the way, the teams' names were to do with making fixtures attractive for promotional reasons. They weren't any reflection of the actual compositions of the teams, really. The first Duke of Richmond, obviously a great sporting dynasty, he was sponsoring a team by 1702, so it goes right back to the start of the 18th century. But I do think that there was a lot of what we now call match fixing. There was a lot of corruption involved in the game, and that probably sort of came to a head in about the 1820s when it couldn't really continue as it had done previously, and major reforms were needed, and that sort of marks a break at the end of cricket, sort of the early ages of cricket. So this is cricket as an incidental detail. Soldier's Widow or Schoolboy's Collection is a coloured Met stint by Robert Dunkerton after W.R. Bigg. I've included this really so you can get a good look at those cricket bats held by the two youths at the left edge of the composition. So those would have been hewn from a single piece of wood. The spliced cane handle didn't come in until the 1830s, I think. So they'd have been very heavy bats, probably good 2.5 kilograms, I'd have thought. Or maybe something close to it, maybe anyway, 2.5 kilograms. We've got breeches and stockings starting to be replaced by trousers. You'll see the youth second from the left has got tight-fitting trousers. Yeah, but it sort of sheds quite a revealing light on, I suppose, the growing popularity of the game. In 1771, the Hambledon Club Minute limited the bat to 4¼ inches, which still applies to this day. In the 1790s, the bat started getting straighter and considerably lighter. This is, again, showing cricket really as incidental detail to a view of Harrow School. There were lots of images of schools from the period which showed a cricket match in the foreground. It was provided a bit of human interest, a sense of scale, perhaps, to the architecture. It's a book illustration engraved by Samuel Rawle in 1802, which is about the time that a youth called Lord Byron turned out for Harrow versus Eton in the 1805 match. It seems he was probably not first choice selection and he didn't get many runs, but anyway, I think the scorebook from that match is preserved at, I think in the Eton College Library, I want to say, with Lord Byron's rather minimal contribution. So anyway, Eton versus Harrow was to get more and more prominence, certainly among society, sort of elite society, through the 19th century progressed, and alongside the university match, the varsity match, Oxford Cambridge, and the gentlemen versus players. So here we have another print study by Henry Thomas Alkin, who many of you will know very well as a sporting artist of great repute. You can see more trousers than breeches here. You can see straight bats. This would have been produced for a drawing manual. This study would have been turned into a print, which was then published in a drawing manual, sort of the instruction of young ladies quite often and boys in the art of drawing. They could trace some of these figures and put them into their own compositions, or they could copy wholesale. So obviously you've got a cricket match going on the upper part of the sheet. You've got a horse and cart and various other things going on below that, but we're obviously interested in the cricket, and we've got a nice clear image of a cricket ball being bowled under arm. We haven't got any evidence of padding yet, although that wasn't far away. I think an article in the 1840s from Bell's Life in London was deploring the use of pads. As perhaps rather unmanly, but they weren't far away. Duke's cricket balls, which have now taken their prominent place in the English game, they were being made in the Tunbridge area of Kent back in the year 1760. And the balls have been set at a maximum of a weight of between 5½ to 5¾ ounces since 1774. Where the circumference has changed over the years. Well, the methods of making the ball haven't changed significantly, not in comparison certainly with the technology of making bats. Here is a watercolour by Richard Dighton, which I owned. Really, the reason I bought it, I wasn't able to identify the sitter, but I bought it for the bat, actually, the cricket bat, and sold it, in fact, with the help of someone from the trade, sold it as a cricket image. Nice straight bat. We're into 1830, aren't we? So we're coming to this end of the Georgian era. Robert Dighton was a famous caricaturist, and this is by his son Richard, who sort of continued the family business. He did portraits and caricatures. and often his watercolors were turned into etchings or prints, though I haven't seen a print of this particular image. I quite like the early gilt frame as well, which I've cropped it slightly, unfortunately, but anyway, it's in a very thick gilt frame and made for very good decoration, but obviously I was pleased to sell it. So we're coming to the end of the period in question, and indeed my talk, but we're going to look at an image here from the 1830s. This is Lord's. We haven't got any defined boundaries. We've got the fielding positions are becoming more entrenched, and manuals of cricket were starting to be produced with the frontispieces showing, identifying particular cricket positions, so the sort of diagrammatic illustrations coming in. Dogs were often banned. You can see why dogs were often banned on the notices for cricket matches, because there were no boundaries and you don't want dogs charging around after a cricket ball. Yeah, as I say, you could all the runs were run at this period. Cricket balls would often disappear into the crowds and take a while to come back, no doubt. I throw this in really because I was quite proud to find this at an auction. I think I got it quite reasonably. I think it was an unrecorded broadside advertisement for a match, first game at Gateshead Borough Cricket Club. Printed in Newcastle locally in about 1840. And as you can see, it's got a woodcut, rather crude woodcut of a match in progress, which presumably was simply a visual identifier to the illiterate passerby that cricket was going on, because a lot of people couldn't read at the time, of course, and then you could ask your friend who could read to read the text. Yeah, that's probably just a recycled wood block that's been used there. That's a rather fun thing. This is the largest cricket print that passed through my hands. It's a commemorative kerchief or handkerchief. And we're into the Victorian era now, where there's more emphasis on technique. You can see the various batting strokes and laws printed on the decorative border, which surrounds this group portrait of various famous cricketers of the time. The image was by the very innovative Nicholas Felix, who was a talented artist and cricketer, an innovator of the game. And he's included himself in this composition. We've got William Clark, second from the left, who was the Nottinghamshire bowler and proprietor of Trent Bridge. Also had a pub on the ground, of course. And he set up the first professional touring team in 1846. The All England 11, I believe it was simply called. So this is we're out of the era of the Regency rakes, the gambling, and we're into these are in fact kind of the first professional sportsmen that I can think of in the world, actually. So they're going around playing matches, often against local 22s. They're touring the country. Players are getting a fee, a slightly lesser fee if they lose than if they win, but it's changed the game. It's what John Arlott would call the Middle Ages of cricket, before the county structure came in and imposed the county championship and more discipline on proceedings. So, what have we learned from these images? Not a lot of technical information about how cricket was played, I must confess. There is only a certain amount of information one can convey before photography, and particularly before motion photography. So these depictions are often stylized, anachronistic, almost theatrical in the way. It's a sort of heightened impression of the game, I suppose. But what is interesting is that clearly the game was growing in popularity in this period. There's nothing like the amount of prints of cricket as there are of other sports. Obviously, horse racing being paramount, a lot of field sports. There was huge amounts of prints, as we know, coming out on those subjects. But we're getting little hints that this is becoming a popular game that is spreading from its roots in the Weald and Downlands of southern England, spreading across the country, and spreading from the countryside to metropolitan centres, particularly in London with the MCC being formed. I mean, it's not till Roger Fenton, who's known for his photography in the Crimean War. He was the earliest photographer of a match that I know of a match in progress in July 1857. We're really clutching at straws in some ways in terms of what they could tell us about the game, but I nonetheless enjoyed owning these prints, and I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about the impressions produced of this game in Georgian England. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jasper. It certainly is an underexplored area for us, and I think we should devote a little more time to understanding how these printed images helped the development of the game. Thank you very much. One of the questions we've had, I suppose you emphasised throughout some of the developments in the game. It was only towards the end you mentioned the ball. Was the ball the same construction right from the beginning, or were there developments in the making of the ball, the construction?
It was very similar, actually. Yeah, it seems from the earliest days of sort of handicraft production of balls in southern England, in Kent, particularly in Sussex. Yeah, the same basic construction method was used as to the present day. The main difference, I think, being that the final leather coating was stitched from 4 quarters rather than 2 halves. So in effect, you had 2 seams, as it were, at right angles, crossing each other in the 18th century and through the early part of the 19th century, which I suppose may have had an even more interesting effect on the bounce of the ball on those rather rough pitches at the time. But yeah, in essentials for construction, yes. I mean, Jukes was the company that happened to emerge from a sort of I say, little handicraft industry around that area. There were often, I think, some clog makers and special people who made leather goods and footwear. A lot of them sort of diversified into cricket balls initially, and then it started to take over prominence in some businesses. But Dukes are the classic example, certainly.
Right, and Dukes are the ones that we use today, are they? That's the
Dukes
brand
is
name.
still the ball, yeah, of the county championship in England today. Just to be clear, sorry, I should have said that. Yeah.
One of the observations we made when we were doing a lot of work on the boxing prints that the BSAT holds in its collection was that the development of the prints led to heroes within the boxing world, amongst the bare knuckle fighters.
Yeah.
All the prints, I think, that you've shown today emphasize a team sport. Did any individuals emerge as early as Georgian times, or did we have to wait till W.G. Grace to see a real sporting hero?
Good question, yes. I mean, I did make brief reference to William Beldam, I think in one of the slides, who was one of the last crop of players that came out of the Hambledon Club in East Hampshire, which sort of emerged as a sort of powerhouse of the game in the third quarter of the 18th century. He was taken into deployment, and I can't think who it was offhand, of one of the aristocrats. Like a lot of these players, he was sort of given a place, sort of given a job, a sinecure job on one of their estates, but his main job was really, and the more remunerative one, was to play cricket for these aristocratic teams. But yeah, he was a he was a very good batsman. You've got John and Richard Nyren. They ran the pub at Hambledon, not the Bat and Ball Inn as it is now, but another pub. And they were both very good early players at this period. And Richard Nyren, the son of John Nyren, his reminiscences, as they were called, which he gave to a Victorian author in the mid-19th century, formed the basis of a lot of our knowledge of early players and the Hambledon scene and the general cricket scene in southeast England. But as you allude to, their popularity could never be on the scale of Grace. Grace was the first huge sporting personality. I mean, they say he was second only to, I mean, he was most recognizable after Queen Victoria, wasn't he? There was images of him everywhere. He did cross over into the age of photography, which helps, and mass photomechanical reproductions. He was in all the periodicals, the graphic, the illustrated periodicals, the graphic, and the Illustrated London News. So his face was everywhere. And this period, these top cricketers weren't known outside sporting, so should we say the circles of sporting enthusiasts.
One of the, you did talk about betting and cricket nowadays seems to be pretty squeamish about the whole idea of betting being involved with the sport.
Yeah.
I wondered whether you'd been able to explore some of the early games. I'm particularly interested in 3 big cricket matches at Newmarket in 1750, where the Earl of March and the Earl of Sandringham had their cricket teams playing, I think, near the entrance to the current racecourse. The reports, the newspaper reports, say that 7,000 or 8,000 people turned up for those games.
Yes.
Were crowds like that? The one thing that surprised me in your the pictures you showed, there's hardly any view of the crowd, and yet great numbers seem to be turning up at the games. And the interesting thing about the Newmarket games, it coincides with the reintroduction of the Jockey Club at Newmarket. They'd been in decline from the early part of the 18th century, and then seemed to be reinvigorated in 1750 with the same man involved, the Earl of March. Do you have there been any prints to show these crowds, any hints about what was going on at Newmarket? That sort of, opening it up to link it into a wider context.
Yes, it's a very good question, as a lot of the cricket matches were played during race meetings at this time, where I suppose there's something of a captive audience. But yeah, there was a sort of, obviously a sort of sideshow to the race meetings quite often, but there's all kinds of other activities going on and other sports. But they were just trying to provide, it was something else to bet on for the punters, of course. And you're right, it's an interesting point about the lack of, you don't see, I can think of very few 18th century images showing significant crowds. They seem to come in the 19th century and Victorian period, where the crowd is the focus of the artist or the image maker seems to be as much on the crowd and society around as the match. But yes, it's all written records, mostly, as you say, contemporary reportage in the periodicals of the day that, they talk about huge crowds. I don't know how much of that is, how reliable that is. Some of it is sort of promotional puff, I suppose, slightly it's an interest, obviously, of the sporting press to suggest very large numbers. That's part of the reason I showed that 1830s view of Lords, because it did show a reasonable crowd. I haven't found any images of contemporary images showing cricket in that context at race meetings. It's the imagery is simply very thin on the ground, unfortunately. So it's all written sources.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
I've had a question in from John Matthews, who's doing a PhD study on a group of agriculturalists who had cricket as a hobby, Earl of Winchelsea, Darnley, Thanet, and a tenant farmer, John Elman, they were all keen cricketers. Have you come across the interaction among the cricket clubs between upper and lower classes? They're obviously the grandees of the world are sponsoring the teams.
Yes,
but they were employing these cricketers, weren't they?
Yeah, yes. They were employing these cricketers as gardeners, as gamekeepers, as groomsmen, I think sometimes on their estates. Yeah, there was some of them were questionable credentials for those roles, but they were very useful in being pitched against their fellow patrons of teams. Yeah, but it's an interesting question, yes, about the social mix of cricket, and there was a very wide mix. It was sort of the one forum, I think, where the labourer could question the Lord, as it were. You know, you could bowl against your social superior or inferior, and it was a great leveler in that sense. You know, for that short time that they were on the pitch together, yeah, it was who was it who said that the French would never had a revolution if they had played cricket? Can't remember now. Anyway, well, one quite famous wit and commentator.
Jasper, is there any evidence of there was some lady spectators, but was there any Georgian prints of lady cricketers? Was that something that you came across?
Rowlandson showed did quite a well-known print of a ladies' match, which was sort of, it wasn't very flattering, to be honest. Obviously, he was having a bit of fun, a bit of a dig. But yeah, there was definitely, it was more of a novelty, I sense, but there was, again, you know, you got used to get married women against unmarried women, for example, of the parish, were sometimes pitted against each other in teams. Yeah, there's one or two. I mean, there's also, I think, Miss Wicket and Miss Trigger. I seem to remember there's an image of two women, one's gone shooting, one with a cricket bat. I think it was John Collett. Anyway, there's two quite well-known sort of Metzton drolls, which were also produced at the time, but there aren't many, I must say.
We have one of the collect pictures within the collection at the BSAT, which is ladies hunting ponies, which they seem to be, like you're saying with the Rowlandson, they seem to be satires, gently poking fun at women taking part in sport, or on the reverse, using it as a way of poking fun at the men as well, and the effeminacy of the men at the time taking part in sports. They're interesting. Yes, that's an interesting point about the Collett one as well. Thank you.
Right, I think our time's up, Jasper. I'd like to thank you for putting this presentation together and for volunteering to take part. Many thanks, it's much appreciated. I think it's also a spur to us to think about other sports, other particularly rural sports, away from the horse, the gun, the hunting, and so on. A subject that is, as I said right at the beginning, is underexplored by us. So thank you very much for being a spur, and I hope we continue to have an exchange so that we can do it through the newsletter, for example. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you, Sally, for making all the arrangements. And the next talk is when, Sally?
6th of June. we're hoping to do a 360-degree tour of the Munnings exhibition for those that can't make it. So it will be a walk through the Munnings exhibition that's coming up at NHRM. So that'll be on the 6th of June at 11 o'clock with the curator, Catherine Field.
Thank you very much for that. And I look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.